Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI Horn Hasan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on October 28th, 2021 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. My apologies to anyone who's tuned in live today, because apparently there was a problem at the studio and the power went down. So if you tuned in to the live show, you're listening to a repeat, most likely from last week. So this will be replaced by today's episode that I'm recording on my own and hopefully will be up shortly. So just again, my apologies. And before I begin with this week's Astro News you can use, I'm going to launch into my usual housekeeping stuff, which is that you can listen to this show, Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking, anytime by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com and clicking on the banner in the upper right-hand corner labeled Radio Show. From there, you can scroll down the page and hear the most recent show, which will be this one as soon as it's received and uploaded, either live or recorded. And you can search the archive listing for past shows you might have missed or ones that you might want to listen to again. Separately, I would truly appreciate it if you follow me on my Facebook page. I have an Instagram page too, Karmic Evolution. Facebook is Karmic Evolution for Your Soul. And it's on the Facebook page that you can sign up for my Conversations About Consciousness newsletter as well. And finally, I'm still offering my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading to my listeners for only $99. And that's for those who want to gain greater consciousness about their soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime. For those of you who want to move from chaos to clarity in areas related to your relationships, your career, your finances, or your health. You want to heal old karmic wounds and, through this reading, find out what they are. Sometimes we're right about that and sometimes we're wrong. Or I should say a reading brings greater awareness to what are actually our old karmic wounds. And if you want to co-create your own future happiness and success, which will lead to awakening to your true potential and highest destiny in this lifetime. So if any of these strike your fancy, make you curious, if you like what I've been saying on the show, whether you've had a reading in the past or not, I promise you it will be painless and fun. And it will be easy to answer a lot of these questions if you take advantage of my special discounted offer for listeners, which is the 1-hour Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $99. Simply email me at SHERI, that's SHERI, at karmicevolution.com, and we'll book your reading today. I love to say that almost half the regular price. Conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. Okay, so let's get on now to this week's Astro News you can use. We are still under the auspices of the waning portion of last week's October 20th Aries full moon, which asks us still to release resistance to making evolutionary progress on both a collective and a personal level. Now, The term evolutionary progress can be applied to issues both large and small, depending on one's perceptions, right? I mean, for some of us, it's the big collective issues that we're aware of often, and for others, it's the little things, not so little, but the things that don't mean as much to the collective, but only mean things to us on the personal level. But as an example, as usual, I use what's going on in the collective to illustrate what we can then bring down into the personal realm and make the connection about how the heavens speak to all of us, both as a group and on an individual level. So for some of us, what's reflected out in the collective shows us on the personal level that it's about conquering inaction related to big picture issues. And one of the biggest picture issues that's been in the collective for a while now is climate change. And that's as it both affects the U.S. and globally, or helping to save the Earth's environment from heating up to such a degree in the future that life becomes fraught with far more dangers, such as things like dying of heat exhaustion or from hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, etc. Now, these natural disasters have always existed, and that's true, but not as frequently and not with such dire consequences to such a large number of local populations as over the past few years, particularly the last 2 years, and particularly with the coronavirus pandemic. So one result of not progressing, or I should say evolving, into a plan to delay planet warming is that it's already been proven, due to the drought and the flooding and the fires, etc., to cause mass migration of large numbers of people from one geographical region to another. And that, in turn, stretches existing resources in terms of food, water, shelter, etc. And this is forecast to continue into the future. So what I'm trying to say here is that on the collective level, efforts to combat climate change are being resisted. This is very simple to see on a number of different counts, but especially if we're looking locally within the U.S. as resistance to some of the Build Back Better bill that the Biden administration is proposing. What goes on in other countries is similar, I'm sure, not all of them, but many. And many of them don't have the resources to make the kinds of necessary changes. But either way you slice it, climate change is happening, it's real, and it will take a greater effect on our everyday lives if we don't recognize that we have to stop resisting that it exists and then adapt accordingly. Now, the other big area of evolutionary growth, and again, trust me, there are many more than I'm naming, but this is one of the big ones that's being mirrored back to us from within the collective, is wealth inequality, also both in the U.S. and around the world. Now, we know this is an issue as the Biden administration tries to negotiate and compromise its way toward passage of its Build Back Better's soft or human infrastructure bill by changing what's in it so that all Democrats in the U.S. Congress, both House and Senate, will vote for it. So as we're in between the waning energies of releasing resistance to change that was brought on by the Aries full moon, which squared along with Mars, Pluto, and hooked into Pluto's square to Eris, in addition to Saturn station direct October 10th, which was a little more than 2 weeks ago now, and 10 days before the last lunation, it seems like trying to move forward feels a lot like embodying a salmon trying to swim upstream, which is to say that swimming against the tide feels fatiguing and like a huge frustrating amount of energy or effort being poured into something that we're not completely convinced we can ultimately achieve. So things are clearly stuck now. Ports haven't been able to move cargo off their docks still because they can't find enough truckers, so more ships still cannot unload. And by the way, if you're seeing things on Facebook about 200,000 ships being stuck off the port of LA, please disregard it. I used to cover the maritime industry as a journalist, and though it was 1,000,000 years ago, I fact-checked that because 200,000 cargo ships is just insane. And it is, in fact, not at all true. So if you want to get an exact number, you have to go to the maritime agencies, both within the U.S. and globally, because those are the ones that actually track the movements of all the ships, cargo carriers, and other ships like oil tankers. And they have the real information, not Facebook. Anyway, Democrats are still working, back to the wealth inequality, Democrats are still working on the Biden Build Back Better plan, saying that they're close, but not exactly there yet. And meanwhile, more secrets keep being revealed every day, which is partly a result of Pluto direct now since October 6th. And yes, Facebook, which I just mentioned, I'm looking at you. To me, a lot of this relates to our current waning lunar phase, as I've said, which noted asks us to release anything that's been holding us back from making evolutionary progress. Like, hello, why can't we make evolutionary progress? What the hell is going on here? Why are we so stuck? But when I think about it on a deeper level, I feel that this means that we've been tasked during this particular period with figuring out what exactly has been holding us back and why. What's got us stuck still in Libra land since that Aries full moon, Eris, opposed the Libra sun and Mars as they all squared Pluto? What is it about putting our shoulder to the wheel to roll it forward toward the path of evolutionary change that's got us frightened, traumatized, or otherwise still sitting on the fence, unable to make decisions? Or maybe we've come to a conclusion of some kind, at least, personally, about what we want, but we haven't been able to implement our plan due to the lack of negotiations or acceptable compromises, either with others or, and here's the important part, or with ourselves, within ourselves, We have to negotiate and compromise with ourselves. Maybe we're not going to be famous because we're 65 at this age and it's just not going to happen. Or maybe we should be content with growing our wealth because we're not going to necessarily win the lottery overnight. Slow and steady wins the race. There are some things that we may have to become more realistic about, and that giving them up or giving up these notions, it will allow us to make forward progress more easily, right? So some of this can be internal as well as external. In addition, the Mars-Pluto square, which perfected last week on October 21st, which was the day after the Aries full moon, set off energies related to not only opposition to our ideas and plans, but outright pushback, and some of it violent. It was on October 21st, for example, that Alec Baldwin fired a gun with supposedly blank rounds in it and killed his cinematographer and wounded his assistant director. Now, that's the kind of energy a Mars-Pluto frictional aspect can bring to this game we call life. Sudden violence. It can also signify having stuff forced down our throats against our will. Mars represents ego. I want what I want when I want it, and I want it now. That's my Scorpio moon kid I was imitating. Fortunately, he's not like that anymore. That was when he was young. Anyway, while Pluto's archetype revolves around power and control. So it seems obvious in hindsight that some kind of violence would occur under this aspect's energies. And I'm sure, because I don't have the chart of every single person and every single location in terms of nations and cities and states and all that around the world, that there were plenty of other things that occurred in people's lives or where people live that were of a more violent nature. So while we have no birth time for Alec Baldwin, we know he was born April 3rd, 1958 in Amityville, New York. And I always use a noon chart when I don't know someone's birth time, primarily because it gives me the moon, the fastest moving planet, at halfway through the day. So without a birth time, we can't get the ascendant or the house wheel set up, but we can tell where the rest of the planets were positioned reasonably within minutes, usually on the day of birth. So this way, Baldwin, who's clearly an Aries sun, and at noon it comes out 13 degrees 25 minutes of Aries. He also comes out with his moon at 7 degrees 2 minutes of Libra. And that means since the moon travels roughly 1 degree every 2 hours, that it's likely in Libra for the whole 24-hour period on his day of birth, but with a caveat, okay? So in general, if you don't have a computerized astrological program, although most people can access, free charts online, so what we find out with Baldwin is that if you run his time for between 12:01 a.m. on that date, April 3rd, 58, the moon was actually in Virgo. But within the hour, it moves into Libra, and then it's there for the whole rest of the 23-plus hour duration of that 24-hour day. So it's likely that his moon is in Libra, but we don't know that for sure, and we don't know the exact degree. In any case, I just want to mention that because his moon really, if it's in Libra, clearly is closer to an opposition to his sun, right, which is in Aries, which would echo the energy of this past Aries full moon because it fell between Aries and Libra. And, since we'll never know for sure where his moon is exactly unless he comes up with the exact birth date for us, it makes sense to simply look at where this Aries full moon, followed by the exact Mars square to Pluto the next day, occurred in his chart, even though we have no ascendant and don't know his house cups. So what we see, though, is that the lunation fell close to his 28 degree, 29 minute Jupiter, if we use the new and birth time. So it's a little bit of a guesstimate, but Jupiter is definitely at that degree because it's not going to move that much in a 24-hour period. Now, Jupiter, in my book, is about expansion of consciousness as well as about what I call faith. And I mean true faith, or finding one's true reason for living, raison d'etre, for being here now. So there's a message here for Alec Baldwin to do with igniting a deeper sense of introspection about his life right now, as Mars and the moon's conjunction triggered this energy as it moved toward the opposition to his sun and the square to Pluto and Eris. So meanwhile, we see he's got natal Mars, the ruler of his Aries sun, in Aquarius, opposite Uranus and Leo. Again, we don't know what house, but that doesn't make any difference because we know that this energy makes him somewhat accident prone in general. What? Whoops, what's that you say? Accident prone? I think so, huh? My guess is that even though most of us don't know Mr. Baldwin on a personal level, if we were to review his history, we might find that he is indeed accident prone, or that he would cop to that. In any case, it's easy to see how this event in Baldwin's life may well set him off on a course different from his previous one, especially as the Aries full moon contacted his natal Jupiter, asking him to let go of previous beliefs so he doesn't stand in the way of his own evolutionary soul growth. We'll watch to see if he plants any seeds around a new evolutionary path forward on or around the Scorpio new moon. Now, that may not be visible to us at all. It may not. I mean, I've read that he's reached out to the family of the woman that he essentially killed. Yes, it was an accident. Yes, there's blame to be assessed, and they're investigating where that blame exactly lies right now. But the point is that this is a soul-searching time for him. And I think because he's somebody who comes to us from the platform of the wider collective, we can extrapolate this down into our own personal lives. Because like I said, we're in the kind of interim phase, in the hallway, if you will, between the last lunation and the one yet to come. So we all have from now until November 4th, when the Scorpio new moon hits at 12 degrees and 40 minutes, of the sign of Scorpio at 2:15 p.m. Pacific and 5:15 p.m. Eastern on that day. So it pays for all of us to prepare for this by asking ourselves now questions like, in what area of life do I most need to change or evolve? Think Alec Baldwin again, too, right? This was a horrible, 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 horrible accident, right? Couldn't have predicted it, but it happened nonetheless. It is possible because I believe he's one of the producers of the movie that they were making, and that the producers allowed 6 people to walk off the set the morning of this accident because they weren't being paid fairly and their issues were being ignored, and they brought in replacements who were not, I assume, unionized, but I don't really know if that's factually true. But in any case, some of this might come back to the fact that the producers wanted to save money and therefore hired people, or through circumstances brought in people or allowed people onto the set who were not really good at their jobs. Okay? So in other words, I'm saying we're taking this on a deeper level, right? In what area of life do I need most to change or evolve, right? Can I leave behind my comfortable but habitual past in favor of transforming so I don't petrify or fossilize from lack of movement in terms of adapting to my future? And what will my future look like if and when I do these things? We might think of this as a transitionary period, like I said, being in the hallway, moving between one place and another. So the question becomes, what kind of transition are we each undergoing or experiencing? Some of us may be moving toward retirement, others into motherhood or marriage or single parenthood or a new job or perhaps a totally different career. I spoke a few weeks ago about 4.3 million people leaving their jobs during the pandemic because for a number of different reasons. Maybe we're moving home or leaving behind old friends in the hopes of making new ones. Our transition can be large or small, but one thing's for certain. It will change us from what we were before into what we've yet to become. And that's just like the scorpionic archetype of the caterpillar who, once identified as an earthbound creature, metamorphs into a butterfly with wings. And that means he can now fly. I mean, think of the difference between viewing life from the ground and from the air, and you'll get what kind of transformational experience may await and what the Scorpio archetype is all about. Now, in addition to thinking about the questions I just posed during this next week as we move towards the Scorpio new moon, here are a few more related to the specific Libra Aries archetypal energies that were present at the Aries full moon. And that's because we're still in its waning phase. Do we need to maintain our current partnerships in order to make the necessary changes? Or have they outlived their evolutionary purpose? Meaning perhaps we've gotten all the conscious awareness about ourselves from them at this point. Relationships mirror back to us our own energies. Okay, that's a classic psychological, astrological teaching. So sometimes relationships outlive their purpose because we've learned all that we needed to learn from this other person in this lifetime. Often, unfortunately, due to the moon's reliance on security and habit, we don't break the relationship because we're in too deep, you know? So this is just food for thought. Because if someone's outlived their evolutionary purpose in our lives, it may or may not be time to let go. Secondly, are we in a partnership out of fear, insecurity, or simply because it's easier than being alone? And is that worth it? Nobody can answer that except ourselves, right? And whether we're with or without a partner currently, how do we need to evolve in order to become a better partner to first ourselves and secondarily to another or others? And as we keep these questions in mind, all pathways toward planting seeds of greater self-empowerment on November 4th, we can be mindful that Mars follows the Sun into Scorpio, Mercury requincunxes Neptune, and the Sun squares Saturn in Aquarius, all on October 30th. All right, so let me just double check that because I had the 29th down here, but I'm pretty sure that I did double check it, and it was the 30th, which is next week on Saturday. No, I'm sorry, it's this Saturday. Yeah, it all happens on the 30th. Yep. So we've got a few days between now and then. Well, not that many, but I want to point out that Mars' mission is always to support the sun. And that's whether we're talking about the sun in the sky currently or about the sun in our individual natal charts. In the archetypal sign of Scorpio, and following the last Aries new moon and Mars square to Pluto, it seems pretty clear that the sun and Mars in the same sign would provide extra oomph to this evolutionary push we're talking about right now. So let's bear in mind also, and I'm going to go down a different path a little bit here. Well, let me back up a minute because, okay. Yeah, I was going to launch into the sun square because the sun will square, as I said, all these things will happen on the 30th. So Mars moves into Scorpio on the 30th and starts to become a stronger supporter of the Scorpio sun. Meanwhile, the Mercury quincunx to Neptune is a repeat. He did that before he stationed retrograde September 29th, did it during the retrograde, and this is the third pass. All right. That's about, making an adjustment to the things that we hear. Not everything that we hear is true. I just pointed out the clogged cargo ships do not number 200,000 outside of the port of LA. We must be responsible and aware for actually verifying what we think or what may be presented as fact so that we know that we're always on the right path. On the other hand, Mercury quincunx Neptune is Mercury in aspect to Neptune is an excellent branding energy. If you're in business, say, for example, and you need to build a brand, this is telling us to make an adjustment to that. How do people perceive you? How do they perceive perhaps your business or whatever? And, so there's always a positive interpretation of every aspect. It's not only negative, but we can't just believe everything we hear, and we might need to adjust how we absorb or perceive information, which I think is the more important piece about Mercury's quincunx to Neptune. So as we move through that energy, let me say that when, the sun squares Saturn on October 30th, I want everyone to bear in mind that Saturn's been a direct, like I said before, in Aquarius for a little over 2 weeks now, or since October 10th. And because he's direct, he's waxing closer to his final square to Uranus in Taurus, which occurs on December 24th at the end of this year. So meanwhile, when the sun perfects an exact fixed square to Saturn, 2 days from now, we can see that he's going to be tapping into a T-square that ties into this evolving Saturn-Uranus square over the next 2 months. In addition, this T-square will be in play, though not exact, because when the sun and the moon come together at next week's Scorpio new moon, both luminaries will be 7 minutes short of an exact opposition to Uranus and Taurus at the time of the lunation. And that tells us, as Saturn is beginning to wax into closer square again to Uranus, that something's got to give and that it will be at the least surprising. So with Uranus, you never know. It could be good surprising, could be bad surprising. That remains to be seen. But once again, with both luminaries just past their discouraging squares to Saturn on the 30th, they're asking us to look for, quote, the chinks in our ego structure, as Rob Hand puts it in his book, Planets in Transit. And I'm going to quote here, the purpose of discouragement, Hand writes, is to reveal the weakness in your conception of yourself and to show where you must work to gain greater confidence in yourself. So if we can use any discouragement, depression, feelings of isolation or inadequacy to build back better, as President Biden would say, we are in alignment with current heavenly energies. So let's talk again about the Saturn-Uranus square. Now that Saturn's beginning to, again, gather speed and close the gap between the two, but will also be in play at the November 4th Scorpio new moon. Saturn's in Aquarius, which rules that sign traditionally, but it also has Uranus as its modern ruler. Now, I'm going to go with the latter because both my psychological and evolutionary astrological studies have taught me how big a trauma sign the unexpected energy of Aquarius can be. So I'm not sure. I want to make sure I'm clear. Saturn is the traditional ruler of Capricorn and the traditional ruler of Aquarius. However, in modern astrology, Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius, not Saturn. So Saturn in Aquarius is what we call disposited by Uranus, and that's the traditional terminology for the ruler of the planet of the sign through which a planet is transiting. In this case, Saturn, which is transiting through Aquarius, which is ruled by my choice, the planet Uranus. Hence, we say that Saturn, while it's transiting through Aquarius, is disposited by Uranus. Then we look to see the sign through which Uranus is currently traveling, and we see it's Taurus. Thus, Uranus is currently disposited by Venus, since Venus rules Taurus, and so on. So that's just a little aside for y'all. Now, Saturn, as many of us know, loves structure, foundation, tradition, and represents authority or the buck stops here kind of energy. A cold but earthy energy, Saturn actually represents lead. He is resistant to change and hung up on precedent. Saturn and Uranus ruled Aquarius, or disposited by Uranus, remains foundationally about tradition, structure, authority, and precedent, like I said, but here he becomes more concerned with bringing these things into alignment with humanitarian goals through building relationships with friends, groups, tribes, communities, and associations. It's in Aquarius that Saturn can promote forward-thinking structural advancement, outside-the-box ideas, and solutions to old or current problems. Now, these would be good descriptions of the kinds of things the Biden administration is trying to push through Congress now. Funding for the future of our mechanical and transportation-oriented infrastructure on one hand, or how companies move traditional goods and services into, out of, and through our country for delivery that provide us foundational security. For example, so people can continue to build houses, office buildings, warehouses, computers, cars, airplanes, trains, buses, etc., and fix or repair highways, bridges, and tunnels, as well as perfect a network of high-speed rail, etc. One can see the need for evolutionary growth here as the U.S. infrastructure is outdated and in dire need of repair. And I don't really think there is anyone who disagrees with that. So while Saturn and Uranus can well be considered to be about traditional, established foundational groups and associations such as corporations and other entities, and Aquarius is about changing the old into something future-oriented and new, we can see resistance right from the get-go. As Saturn moves to re-square Aquarius, or as he's been squaring off and on Saturn Aquarius squaring Uranus and Taurus for the entire year. So let's remember that Saturn first ingressed into Aquarius in mid-December 2020, and no sooner had he gotten acclimated there than he retrograded back into Capricorn in early July 2020. And that was right about the time after the May 25th murder of George Floyd, which sparked Black Lives Matter protests and people beginning to take to the street protesting about the inequality inherent in the exclusion of people of color from the traditional societally established group benefits of white people, right? So the collective banded together against the imposition of old, outdated, outworn, no longer relevant to society's future growth toward equality, when Saturn moved from Aquarius back in traditional status quo Capricorn. Now, since then, of course, it's moved back in Aquarius, but we've also seen on the political stage, and remember, Uranus is representative in mundane astrology of the legislature, which makes the laws, and Saturn of the judge, who decides who's broken them and should be punished, and for how long. So this has been going on in the collective, not only in the courts, and the past few weeks I've mentioned the curtailing of constitutional rights of women to have an abortion in Texas, something that's also been proposed in several other states, including Mississippi, which will have its day in court December 1st. So I'm going to talk more about this and Venus's retrograde period in December, late December, when she is going to conjoin with Pluto 3 times. We'll talk about that on a future show. But let's go back to our original dilemma now. What or who is standing in the way of evolutionary progress as we're poised in the hallway between the Aries full moon's request for us to release resistance to evolutionary growth and forward progress, and planting that new seed at the Scorpio new moon next week that will lead us to be able to face what scared us about taking the future into our own hands in a confidently self-empowered way. So I thought this would be a good time, especially since I didn't get to it last week, although I said I would, to visit Arizona Senator Kristen Sinema's natal chart, since she's one of the primary people, along with West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, who's been holding things up on the legislative front here in the U.S. So what makes Kristen Sinema tick, astrologically speaking? Well, the first thing we notice about Kristen Sinema's natal chart is that born July 12, 1976, at 12:10 p.m. in Tucson, Arizona, she's a 14-degree, 50-minute Libra rising, and I'm using the Placidus house system here. Is she attractive? Most Libra risings are. Well, if you look up a picture from her, and I looked up one from Wikipedia by just Googling her name, you can see a picture of her from 2010. She's currently about 45 years old, so that would make her about 35 here. And I'll just say to you, she looks pretty beautiful to me, but you can decide for yourself. All right. So now that we got that out of the way, the next thing we notice about her chart is that she's a 10th house Cancer Sun, Venus, and Mercury, with Mercury situated tightly on her moon-ruled midheaven. That's a Cancer midheaven, with her 10th house sun not far away. Now, this combination of planets, element, and house denotes someone who's devoted to a career or to establishing a reputation out in the wider world as a caring, nurturing individual. Sinema was, in fact, before running for office, a social worker and a lawyer. Now, the next thing we notice about her chart is that she's a 10th house. No, I said that already. Sorry. Now, what's interesting is that she's got the moon ruling her midheaven, which means that her midheaven is in Cancer, but that the natural chart, and that's for all of us, in the natural chart, which starts with Aries at the ascendant, Saturn rules everyone's 10th house. So what we have in Sinema's chart is the moon or Cancer ruling her midheaven, and we superimpose that over a Capricorn Saturn ruled midheaven. And then we go down to the IC and we see that the bottom of her chart, the cusp into the gateway into the 4th house of home, family, roots, tradition, security, the past, memory, and mother, is Capricorn. Now, that axis, the midheaven and IC or MC-IC axis, is called the parental axis, particularly in psychological astrology. So the thing here is that since her midheaven's in Cancer and her IC in Capricorn, and the MC-IC axis is the parental axis, with the IC likened to the roots of the family tree through which we grew up and come out into the world at the top, or the midheaven, is known, like I said, as the parental axis, but ruled by these planets and signs, Saturn and Cap on the house of the family roots, and the moon Cancer on the house of our career, our social status, our reputation, means that family life may well have been somewhat strict and authoritarian because Saturn rules her fourth house, which is the moon's natural domain. And that's a possibility further endorsed by the fact that she's got a wide square, most people would say too wide, but I'm a psychological astrologer, between her Mercury-Sun conjunction in Cancer at the midheaven and her 12th house Pluto in Libra. So Pluto squaring Mercury can give one a rather deep thinking but tendency towards obsession, while Pluto square the Sun can indicate that someone else was controlling things behind the scenes, particularly because the Pluto's in the 12th house, and the Pluto square Sun can be a controlling or powerfully authoritative father. Now, of course, the story lies with her, but that's what it looks like from the outside so far. Meanwhile, Cinema's an Aquarius moon in the fourth house, bringing more Cancerian energy into the picture, as again, the moon naturally rules the fourth house in everyone's chart. I've noticed that Aquarius moons tend to rationalize their emotions rather than allow the person to feel them fully. And this can be a kind of defense mechanism reaction to keep the person from experiencing deep emotional pain. I always think of a friend that I have when I first started out in astrology with the Aquarius moon, and one of the stories she told me was that her parents were starting a business. They had relocated. They were immigrants from another country. They relocated to New York. They started a company, and when she was 6 years old, she was sick and had to stay home from school. And she said, well, my mother worked with my father, and they couldn't afford for her to stay home for even one day. And they were, because there was too much work or whatever. So my mother would call me every few hours to tell me when to take my medicine. So I said to her, wow, that must have hurt, because I'm a Cancer moon. And she said, no, I understood even then that they were trying to build a better life for me and my brother. So I always felt like she bypassed the pain of it. It's not that we have to or want to feel the pain so that we can lay blame or take revenge or action against someone. It's that we need, especially someone like Cinema, who has so much Cancerian energy at the top of her chart, to acknowledge the pain. So what I'm saying happens with an Aquarius moon, or what can happen, is that the person goes straight from the pain, skips over it, and just rationalizes it and says, well, my parents were too busy. They were building this better life for me, so I can't blame them. But it's not that you're asking them to blame them. You're asking them to sit and feel the pain so that they can make use of it in some way by recognizing what feels good and what feels bad to them, right? Because if not, it becomes a little bit dissociated. So this kind of defense mechanism, like I said, keeping one from feeling emotional pain, in short, is like logic prevailing over emotion. And that's a good thing for a lawyer, right? Because you got to put your emotions out of it and argue the case based on the facts. So what happens here is that Cinema's got her rational ego versus her emotional moon, in addition to being at odds with her sensitive Cancer Sun and Mercury, right? She's got a rational versus emotional moon, and this is at odds with her sensitive Cancer Sun Mercury, and all of them are part of a fixed cross. Well, actually, Mercury is not, and the Mercury and the Sun is not. She's a fixed cross where her moon in Aquarius opposes Saturn in Leo, and it's squared from the 7th house of partnership by both her south node at 9 degrees Taurus and her 1 degree Chiron in Taurus, and opposes her, hang on, let me look at the chart. It opposes her, is this it? No. Yes, opposes her Uranus at 3 degrees. So she has, in other words, a south node at 9 degrees of Taurus in the 7th house of partnership, indicating she comes from resistance to change about changing her partnerships, but Also, that's conjunct Chiron in Taurus, which is a wound around one's sense of values. And in particular, Venus has to do with what gives us pleasure, the five senses. So Chiron in Taurus can indicate a person who doesn't feel valuable. They don't feel beautiful out in the world. And that is opposed by the North Node in Scorpio, meaning she's here to change. She's here to transform herself into someone who believes in herself rather than needing partnership. And to do so by, rapid change, right? But the fact that Uranus bears down on the South Node indicates that there's some trauma here, as does the moon in Aquarius and its square to Uranus, right? And again, that nodal axis and the Chiron opposite Uranus are squared by the moon in Aquarius in the 4th and Saturn at 4 degrees Leo in the 10th. So right away, we know we've got someone who appears to be a victim of some kind of trauma. What I would ask Kristen Sinema if I was reading her chart for her personally is, was there a sudden loss, particularly around an authority figure, potentially, even though what I said before was the father was the authority figure, that there was a loss of some kind of a female, probably the mother, but not necessarily only the mother, like a grandparent or something, that affected her greatly between her youngest years up to about the age of 21 and 22. So I find that usually, Chiron usually manifests as a wound early in life. So, and that resulted because the moon opposite Saturn in a feeling of loss, isolation, and loneliness. And we know that Kristen Sinema is unique. We know that she marches to the beat of her own drummer. We know that she was labeled as a progressive, but is now getting a lot of slack for having sided with a lot of the quote-unquote moderates, the moderate Democrats who are sort of like liberal Republicans in this day and age, right, if there is such a thing, and that there's the potential for Sinema to be rebellious. Saturn square Uranus is a particularly rebellious energy. The moon in Aquarius can be a rebellious energy. Moon square Aquarius can be a rebellious energy, right? So it's sort of like saying, well, you all think I'm some way, but deep down inside, I'm very, very, very sensitive. And so to cover up my sensitivity, I'm going to pretend that nothing hurts me, and I'm going to do my own thing and ignore you all. And that sounds like pretty much what she's been doing. So in any case, I think there's a wound to the mother or to someone in the family here, and that set the tone early in her life. And Saturn's been transiting through her 4th house. What's interesting to note with Sinema is that Saturn's stationed on her moon. And the 4th house is, of course, the place where we seek inner emotional security by being able to build, once we make headway in seeking emotional security, we can then begin to build stronger foundations on the outside of our lives. And so Saturn recently stationed at 6 degrees Aquarius on her moon, and that triggered that grand cross and undoubtedly caused her to seek out what will make her more secure for the future. So again, with the South Node at 9 degrees of Taurus and Saturn about to square her karmic nodal axis again as we speak, since transiting Saturn is today at 7 degrees of Aquarius, I think she's seeking to find inner security through outer financial gains. As, reports are that she's gone to the right in terms of fundraising from corporations and PACs instead of eschewing being controlled by such entities and remaining funded by people's donations, like, the way that Bernie Sanders and others collect their campaign monies. So again, even though she originally presented herself as a progressive, when this didn't turn out to benefit her, or shall we say satisfy her need for true inner security, she turned to fundraising as a way to secure her position of power. And it's also interesting that the January 12th, 2020 Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which started at that time a new 35-year cycle, fell on her 8th house Jupiter. Acquiring money as a way to expand power would be one way to look at that. But since her karmic mission is to overcome resistance to changing partnerships, that Taurus, 7th house Taurus South Node, and moving towards Scorpio's North Node energy of embracing transformation as a means toward wholeness, it's tough to say where she falls on whether she's moving in the right direction or not. However, and this is a big however, Chiron in Taurus, like I said, is that wound to one's sense of value. So at 45, she's recently finished her Saturn opposite Saturn transit, one of the marks of the end of midlife crisis, which typically begins somewhere between 38 and 42, depending on the actual individual person. So she's shifted, perhaps because of her wounded sense of what is truly of value, and that's caused her to come down on the side of wealth. 8th house Jupiter is a Jupiter-Pluto combination, whereby it's the riches hidden beneath the surface. So in her case, it may be her incapability to prove her own worth that sent her over. Like, in other words, if unconsciously you're trying to prove your own worth, and you're rebellious, you prove your own worth by being rebellious, right? I'm different from you, so I'm worth more than you. You're just a clone. You're a copy. You're a sheeple. You just go along to get along. Not me. Look at me. I'm much more, different than that. But meanwhile, that Cancer energy, it hides, but it hides in plain sight because it's in the 10th house where everyone can see it, right? So again, she shores up her insecurity by shoring up and collecting other people's money as a way to stay in power. So I think we have to stay tuned because it looks like many in her state are unhappy with her now. 6 staffers recently quit, objecting to her newfound love of corporate contributions. And we'll find out at the next election, but even though she won't be up again until the 2024 term, and a lot can happen between now and then. Now, as usual, I've spent most of my time not getting to everything I promised, but I touched on Joe Manchin's chart last week, but only to note that we have no birth time for him, but his sun's at 0 degrees 40 minutes of Virgo and conjunct Venus and Mercury in late Leo. He's also got Saturn Pluto in Leo, and that conjunction occurred at his birth, or a little before his birth, which was, hang on, I will find it for you in 2 seconds. Where is Mr. Manchin on my computer? He was born, and I don't know if I gave this out last week, but he was born August 24th of 1947 in Farmington. I think I said last week I wasn't sure if that was West Virginia or not because it's not coming up on my computer, but it's easy to check if you just Wikipedia him. In any case, he was born at the after World War II ended and as the Marshall Plan was being instituted. So he is a product of that kind of energy, which again, as I mentioned, his moon may or may not be on the Sibley chart's ascendant, is that he's kind of a proponent of the manifest destiny way of thinking, that America can just keep expanding, that it's those Horatio Alger adventurous individuals who can make something of themselves while everybody else lives, or, I should say, sucks off the teat of welfare or the government, and that these things are now outdated. So he doesn't seem to realize that things have changed. And, with Pluto, with Saturn, hang on 1 second. I'm just looking to see quickly if I can find, where is Saturn? Yes, Saturn at 7 is, he's coming up for another half Saturn return. That Saturn at 7 is going to oppose his 13 and 14 degrees Pluto and Saturn in Leo, not that far from now. And Uranus is squaring that Pluto-Saturn. So again, this is a guy who's got to figure out whether he's going to stay with the old or whether he's going to move to the new. And because he's a moderate, he appears to be at least open to moving to the new. But the question is going to be whether this is a guy who is not going to be able to let go of his resistance to evolutionary change for both selfish personal reasons, since he is a millionaire from his coal businesses, or whether he is going to jump on board and become more of a friend of the progressives in terms of things like climate change and helping families to breach the gap of financial inequality in this country. All right, so in any case, let's all take this week to contemplate what needs to change and how, if we let go of our resistance to such change, we can make more positive forward progress towards our individual futures. And I say, hear, hear to that. So thank you, everyone, for joining me today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week, November 4th, for the Scorpio new moon, for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to go